The afternoon light slanted through the narrow window of the old house, carving golden lines across the dust that hung thick in the air. Every footstep stirred decades of silence. The siblings, Emma and Daniel, moved slowly, speaking in hushed tones as if afraid to disturb the ghosts of their childhood home. The attic smelled of cedar, mothballs, and something faintly metallic, a scent that clung to forgotten memories and the weight of time itself. They hadn't been back since the funeral. Grief still sat heavy in the air, a constant reminder that their grandmother, Margaret Hollis, the quiet, graceful woman who'd raised them after their parents' accident, was gone. The attic had always been off-limits when she was alive. Too dangerous up there, she used to say, though neither of them ever believed her. The truth was, she simply didn't want anyone going through her things. Old furniture leaned against the walls, draped in sheets yellowed by age. Boxes were labeled in her precise, slanted handwriting, winter clothes, Christmas ornaments, family albums. But near the far corner, half hidden beneath a torn quilt, sat something different. It was a trunk, large, wooden, reinforced with tarnished metal brackets. Its surface was scarred with time, the color faded to a dull gray-brown. The siblings exchanged glances. Emma crouched beside it first, running her fingers across the lid. The lock was still in place, iron, rusted, but stubbornly intact. A small brass plate near the handle bore no name, no initials, just a faint engraving of an oak leaf. "Did you ever see this before?" Daniel asked. She shook her head. "No. Grandma never mentioned it." The latch resisted their first attempts to open it. It was heavy, solid. Whoever sealed it hadn't wanted it opened easily. After a few minutes of struggling, Daniel fetched a small crowbar from the garage. The sound of the metal giving way echoed like a shot in the quiet house. The lid creaked open. Inside, the trunk was lined with faded blue fabric, frayed at the edges. There were old clothes, yellowed lace gloves, a wedding veil folded neatly beside a pair of men's shoes. Beneath those, a stack of brittle newspapers, some dated as far back as 1945. It was as if someone had packed away a slice of another life and hidden it from the world. But then Emma noticed something else. At the very bottom, wrapped in a layer of silk and bound with a red ribbon, was a bundle of letters. The ribbon was fragile, almost translucent, as if it might crumble at a touch. On the top envelope, written in delicate cursive, were the words, "My dearest M." She frowned. "That's Grandma's initial." Daniel leaned closer. The paper smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. He turned over the envelope, expecting to find a return address, but there was none. Only a small, precise signature at the bottom of the letterhead, E. The first few pages were brittle, the ink faded but still legible. As Emma began to read aloud, her voice trembled slightly. The words were gentle, almost poetic, filled with longing and tenderness. Whoever this person was, they loved Margaret deeply. The dates were from 1943, right in the middle of the war. At first, it seemed like the letters of a young romance, separated by distance and uncertainty. But something in the tone shifted as she continued. The sentences became shorter, more urgent. The writer spoke of secrets, of fears, of something that must never come to light. Daniel frowned. "This doesn't sound like just love letters." She stopped at the end of the third letter. The final line sent a chill through the air. "If they ever discover what we did at Hollow Creek, it will destroy us both." Neither spoke for several seconds. The attic, moments ago filled with the warmth of nostalgia, now felt colder, heavier. Daniel broke the silence. "Who's E?" Emma shook her head slowly. "I don't know. But Grandma was hiding something, something big." As the light outside dimmed and shadows stretched across the attic floor, the trunk seemed to take on a presence of its own, a silent witness to something buried long ago. What had started as an act of cleaning out an old home had become something else entirely, the beginning of an unraveling. Emma carefully retied the ribbon and placed the letters back inside the trunk, though her hands were trembling. Somewhere in those pages lay a secret their grandmother had guarded for over 70 years. A secret that someone, perhaps more than one person, had gone to great lengths to keep buried. As they closed the attic door behind them, neither noticed the faint scorch mark beneath where the trunk had been resting, an old, circular burn in the wooden floorboards, blackened at the edges, like the echo of a fire long extinguished. The house was silent again. But the mystery had just begun. The next morning, Emma sat at the kitchen table with the bundle of letters spread out before her. The sunlight filtering through the lace curtains gave the paper a fragile glow, like something sacred, almost alive. Daniel poured 2 cups of coffee but didn't drink his. His eyes were fixed on the pages, on the name that appeared again and again at the bottom, just one letter, E. Whoever E. was, he had written to their grandmother with a kind of devotion that felt almost desperate. The first few letters were dated between February and August of 1943. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, like a man writing in stolen moments. He spoke about the war, about how everything back home felt like a memory fading too quickly to hold on to. There were mentions of nights spent under dim lanterns, of the scent of magnolia trees after rain, of dreams of returning to someone he called my only peace in a world gone mad. Emma read the words softly, her voice trembling with both fascination and sorrow. At first, the tone was affectionate, tender. The letters described secret meetings by the riverbank, a planned escape from the chaos of the world. It felt like a hidden love story, the kind their grandmother, quiet and reserved, would never have spoken of. But then, midway through one letter, the language shifted. I fear what we've done cannot stay hidden much longer, one line read. I hear whispers in the barracks. They know about Hollow Creek. Daniel frowned. Hollow Creek again. That's twice now. Emma nodded, unfolding another page. The next letter had been written weeks later. The handwriting was shakier, the ink darker, as if pressed with more force. They're asking questions about the night of the fire. If they come for me, I won't run again. But I can't let them reach you. You must promise to burn everything if it comes to that. Her voice faltered. The room felt colder. The later letters grew fragmented, erratic. Some had words crossed out violently, others stopped mid-sentence as if the writer had been interrupted. One was nearly torn in half, the edges burned slightly, a faint scent of smoke still lingered on it, even after decades. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. Do you think Grandma ever replied? Emma hesitated. If she did, she didn't keep her copies here. A silence settled between them. The ticking of the old kitchen clock was suddenly deafening. Emma carefully lifted another envelope from the stack. It was dated October 14, 1945, 2 years after the first letter. The handwriting was still recognizable, but more uneven, as though written by someone exhausted or ill. I returned to Hollow Creek last night, it began. Everything's gone. The boarding house, the bridge, the old oak by the water, burned to ash. But I found the box. I couldn't destroy it, not yet. It holds too much of us, too much of what they'd rather erase. I'll hide it somewhere safe, somewhere you'll remember. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The box, she whispered. He means the trunk. Daniel looked at her, realization dawning slowly. You think this guy, E., hid it for her? It sounds like it, she said quietly. Or maybe they both did. There were still a few letters left, the most recent dated December 1946. By now, the ink had nearly faded, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. The words pulsed with fear and longing. I can't stay much longer. They're closing in, and I'm tired of running. But remember this, what happened at Hollow Creek wasn't an accident. Someone wanted it forgotten. Promise me, if you ever open the trunk, you'll find the truth before they do. Emma stared at the final paragraph. The last line ended abruptly, the pen stroke unfinished, trailing off in a faint smear of ink. There was no signature this time, only a single blotch, as if the writer had tried to sign his name but stopped at the first letter. She looked up, meeting Daniel's eyes. He never finished it. Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. Do you think he died before he could? Emma didn't answer. She gathered the letters carefully, her hands trembling. Something about the unfinished words made her skin prickle, not just sadness, but a sense that whatever had started between their grandmother and this man hadn't truly ended. As she stacked the letters back into a neat pile, something small fluttered out, a scrap of paper she hadn't noticed before. It looked like a torn corner from a different letter, and on it were just a few words, written hastily, "They'll never find us if we stay near the creek. Promise me you'll come when you see the fire." Emma's pulse quickened. "See the fire," she murmured. Daniel leaned forward. "What does that even mean?" "I don't know," she said, glancing at the letters again. "But if this Hollow Creek place was real, maybe whatever happened there is what Grandma spent her whole life trying to forget." Outside, a wind picked up, rattling the window panes. The sound made Emma jump, and Daniel reached over instinctively, steadying the stack of papers before they scattered. The air in the room felt charged now, not with nostalgia, but with something darker. They both sat in silence for several moments, each lost in thought. Then Daniel said softly, "We need to find Hollow Creek." Emma hesitated. If Grandma wanted this secret buried, he shook his head. "It's too late for secrets. She's gone, and now we've found the truth she tried to hide." Emma looked again at the letters, at the fading ink, the burnt edges, the trembling handwriting that had survived wars, fire, and time itself. For the first time, she felt that they weren't just reading history, they were being pulled into it. Outside, the wind died down, leaving behind only the creak of the house and the faint rustle of paper, like whispers from another lifetime. As Emma gathered the last letter and slipped it back into its envelope, she noticed one more thing she hadn't before: faint fingerprints on the back of the final page, preserved in the old ink. And below them, barely visible, the faint outline of a number, 1946-17C. "What's that?" Daniel asked. "I don't know," Emma said quietly, tracing it with her thumb. "But I think it's where we're supposed to go next." The letters had begun as relics of love. Now, they were a map, leading straight into the heart of a secret their grandmother had carried to her grave. 2 days later, the siblings sat surrounded by books, old newspapers, and Emma's laptop glowing in the dim light of their grandmother's study. The name Hollow Creek lingered between them like a ghost, a whisper from the past they couldn't ignore. Every search led to the same result: nothing current, no modern town, no map reference. But buried deep within an old digital archive of county records, Emma found a clue: a 1946 article titled, "Fire Consumes Hollow Creek Boarding House, One Missing." The text was grainy, scanned from a newspaper browned by time. Daniel leaned over her shoulder as she read aloud. It described a late-night blaze that gutted an old boarding house on the outskirts of a small mountain town. The article mentioned that several residents escaped, but one man was never found. His name, Elias R. The initials froze both of them. E, the same as in the letters. The article went on to say that the cause of the fire was unknown but under investigation. It ended with a single sentence that sent a chill through them both: local authorities suspect foul play, though no charges were ever filed. Daniel sat back, rubbing his temples. So he didn't just vanish, he burned. Emma's eyes stayed on the screen. Or someone wanted it to look that way. They dug deeper. Public records revealed that Hollow Creek had been a quiet community during the 1930s and 40s, a place where war widows, drifters, and laborers came to find work in the nearby mills. But by the 1950s, it had vanished from official documentation entirely. No population count, no postal records, nothing. It was as if the town had been erased. Maybe it was destroyed, Daniel suggested. Maybe, Emma replied, but towns don't just disappear from history. Hours passed as they combed through more archives. Emma found a 1947 notice from a local government office: property of Hollow Creek declared condemned and repossessed by state order. No reason was listed. Only a short note: unsafe for habitation due to contamination. Daniel frowned. Contamination? Like pollution? Or something worse, Emma murmured. In one of the old boxes from the attic, they found an even stranger clue. Folded among family papers was a photograph, black and white, slightly overexposed, edges frayed. It showed their grandmother standing beside a man in uniform, his hand on her shoulder. Behind them, a sign read, Hollow Creek Boarding House, Rooms for Rent. The man's face was partly shadowed, but the resemblance to the photograph from the newspaper article was undeniable. The same high cheekbones, the same uncertain smile. Elias or Daniel stared at it for a long moment. She really knew him. More than knew him, Emma said softly. She loved him. But something about the photo bothered her. Behind them, faintly visible in the background, was a third figure, blurred, almost hidden by the exposure. A child, standing near the boarding house steps, watching the camera. The caption on the back read only, Summer, 1945. Before the fire. Daniel exhaled slowly. Who's the kid? Emma shook her head. I don't know. But if that child was there the night of the fire, she didn't finish the sentence. As evening fell, they decided to trace the location. Emma found a reference to a disused road still called Hollow Creek Trail on an old map from the 1960s. It led through the forest toward the foothills, a few miles from where their grandmother's childhood home once stood. The same area where the family's land was still registered. It's real, Daniel said quietly. The place actually existed. But it's gone now, Emma replied. Wiped out. Like someone wanted it forgotten. To confirm, they reached out to the local historical society. The elderly archivist who answered sounded hesitant when Emma mentioned Hollow Creek. That place, he said after a pause. Most folks around here don't talk about it anymore. Bad history. My father used to say the government bought up the land after the war. Some kind of accident. Chemical spill, maybe. People got sick. Died. Others, just left. Do you know anything about a fire? She pressed. A longer silence followed. Then the man's voice dropped to a whisper. The fire wasn't the worst part. Before she could ask more, the line went dead. Emma and Daniel sat staring at each other, the static hum of the disconnected call echoing in the room. A tension hung in the air that neither could name. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly, rolling across the hills as if warning them to stop digging. But curiosity had already become obsession. Emma opened another box from the trunk, this one filled with folded newspapers. Near the bottom, a brittle page caught her eye, an obituary dated weeks after the Hollow Creek fire. The name listed under, in memoriam, was Margaret Elwood, not Margaret Hollis. Their grandmother's maiden name wasn't Elwood, it was Reeves. She used another name, Daniel murmured. Emma nodded. She was hiding under it. They stared at each other in stunned silence. The gentle, soft-spoken woman who had spent decades baking pies, tending her garden, and telling bedtime stories had once lived under an alias, tied to a vanished town, a missing soldier, and a fire nobody wanted to remember. As the wind picked up outside, Emma turned back to the trunk and lifted one of the letters again, now seeing it in a different light. The handwriting, the trembling ink, the mention of Hollow Creek, it all connected, forming a thread that reached beyond the grave. Daniel broke the silence. There's only one way to find out what really happened. Emma looked up. You mean, we go there, he said. To what's left of it. The room seemed to grow darker around them, the hum of the house deepening into an uneasy quiet. The last words of the final letter echoed in Emma's mind, if they find out what we did at Hollow Creek, it's all over. And as lightning flashed through the window, illuminating the old photo of their grandmother and the shadowed man beside her, Emma couldn't help but feel that the story buried in that forgotten town wasn't finished. Not yet. Because if the dead kept their secrets, the living would have to dig them up. The drive to Hollow Creek began under a pale gray sky that threatened rain. The siblings followed the directions Emma had pieced together from maps and county records, roads that barely existed anymore, narrow trails swallowed by overgrown brush. As they drove deeper into the valley, the world seemed to quiet around them. No cars. No houses. Just the whisper of wind through the trees and the rhythmic hum of the engine struggling against the steep incline. They passed a rusted road sign half buried in the weeds. The paint had peeled away, but a few faint letters still clung to the metal: Hollow Creek, 2 miles. Daniel slowed the car, glancing at Emma. So it was real after all. Emma nodded, staring out the window. The trees grew denser, taller, their branches knitting together like ribs of an old cathedral. The road narrowed to a single lane, patches of gravel breaking through what had once been asphalt. It felt less like driving toward a town and more like descending into something forgotten, something that didn't want to be found. After nearly an hour, the road ended at a clearing. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, as the wind shifted, they saw it, the remnants of Hollow Creek. Crumbling stone foundations half buried in moss, the skeletal frame of what might once have been a bridge, and a scattering of warped signposts pointing to nowhere. Time had devoured the town, leaving behind only traces, like bones beneath a shallow grave. Daniel stepped out first, crunching over broken glass and gravel. Hard to believe people actually lived here. Emma followed, clutching her camera. It's like the earth tried to erase it. They began to explore. A faded sign still clung to a post near the entrance of the clearing: Hollow Creek Boarding House. Most of the letters were gone, but the outline was unmistakable. The remains of the structure stood nearby: charred wood, collapsed beams, and blackened stones buried under decades of debris. The fire had left its mark. Emma crouched near one of the fallen beams, brushing aside dirt and ash. "Look at this," she whispered. Embedded in the soot was a fragment of porcelain, the painted curve of a teacup handle still intact. She lifted it carefully, her fingers trembling. It survived. Daniel looked around uneasily. "I can't shake the feeling that we shouldn't be here." As they explored, the air seemed to grow heavier, colder. The forest pressed close, its silence almost watchful. They found the outline of what might have been a main street, stone steps leading to nothing, the faint shape of a church window, its stained glass long shattered. A movement caught Emma's eye. An old man stood at the tree line, watching them. His clothes were worn, his face weathered by years of sun and wind. When she called out, he hesitated before stepping closer. "You shouldn't be here," he said in a gravelly voice. Daniel exchanged a look with Emma. "We're just visiting. Our grandmother used to live here." The man's eyes narrowed. "Then she's part of it." "Part of what?" Emma asked. He stared past them toward the ruins. "They burned it to stop the spread. But it wasn't the fire that killed the town, it was what came before it." "What happened here?" Daniel pressed. The old man shook his head slowly. "People started disappearing. First a child, then 2 boarders. No one talked about it. The sheriff came, then the soldiers. They said it was sickness. But I remember the smoke. I remember the screams." His voice trembled slightly. "They said the war took our men, but it was this place that took our souls." Emma felt the hairs rise on her arms. "Do you know a man named Elias R.?" The man's gaze darkened. "Elias Rowe. Soldier. Stayed at the boarding house before the fire. Good man. Didn't deserve what they did to him." "What did they do?" Daniel asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the ruined building, his expression clouded with something between grief and guilt. He tried to tell the truth. They called him a liar. Then one night, the fire came. Some said it was an accident, others said it was justice. I saw him run into that house, and I never saw him again. Emma felt her throat tighten. And Margaret Hollis? He studied her carefully, then spoke in a whisper. You look like her. Emma's heart pounded. So you knew her. She came back after the fire, he said. Only once. Stood right there by the oak, looking at what was left. Said she was sorry for not saving him. I told her there was nothing to be done. But she didn't believe me. The wind picked up suddenly, rustling the trees, scattering ash and leaves across the clearing. When Emma turned back, the old man had already started walking away, fading into the shadows of the forest. They searched for hours after that, combing through debris and dirt. Emma found fragments of burned letters, rusted nails, a melted locket half buried in the ash. Each discovery pulled them deeper into the weight of the place. As dusk fell, Daniel called out from near what had once been the foundation of the boarding house. Emma! Over here! She hurried to his side. He knelt in front of a patch of ground that looked slightly disturbed, a mound of earth darker than the rest. Half buried in the soil was a small, rusted key, its ornate handle shaped like an oak leaf. Emma froze. It's the same symbol as on the trunk. Daniel brushed off the dirt. Looks like it's been here for decades. The key was cold in Emma's palm, heavier than it should have been. She turned it over, noticing faint engraved initials, E.R. Neither of them spoke. The forest around them seemed to close in, the last light of day fading into a gray twilight. Daniel broke the silence first. There's something else in that trunk, isn't there? Emma nodded slowly. Something Grandma didn't want us to find. As they walked back toward the car, the sound of the wind through the trees almost seemed to form words, soft, fragmented, like whispers carried from another time. By the time they reached the edge of the clearing, the first drops of rain began to fall, hissing softly against the leaves. Emma turned for one last look at the ruins of Hollow Creek. Through the mist, the silhouette of the oak tree stood tall and motionless, its roots curling deep into the earth. Somewhere beneath it, she felt, lay a truth their grandmother had tried to bury forever. And now, the ground itself seemed to be daring them to dig it up. The storm broke fully by the time Emma and Daniel returned home. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rolling low and distant like a growl beneath the earth. The air in the house felt heavier now, as though Hollow Creek had followed them back, clinging to their clothes, their skin, their thoughts. The trunk sat on the kitchen table where they had left it, its dark wood gleaming faintly under the flickering light. Emma placed the key beside it, the metal glinting in a way that almost seemed alive. Neither of them spoke for a while. The hum of the refrigerator and the rhythm of the rain filled the silence. Finally, Daniel exhaled. You think it fits? Emma nodded slowly. It has to. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the key. The moment the metal slid into the lock, she felt a pulse, almost like the faint echo of a heartbeat traveling through her fingertips. The mechanism clicked, a sound so soft yet final that it seemed to slice through the quiet of the room. The lid creaked open, releasing a faint smell of old smoke and damp paper. Inside lay a small stack of items wrapped in faded cloth. The first was a folded letter, edges singed and brittle. The second was a photograph, sepia-toned, showing a man in a soldier's uniform standing beside a woman with light hair and kind eyes. On the back, in faint ink, were the words, Elias and M. H. Hollow Creek, 1864. Emma's breath caught. M. H. Margaret Hollis, she whispered. Daniel leaned closer. So it's true. He was real. They were real. Beneath the photo was another object, a small, leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked, the pages warped with age. Emma opened it carefully, revealing lines of neat handwriting, dated from the final months of the war. The ink was faded, but still legible enough to read. The nights grow darker. The air tastes of iron. Margaret says the others hear things, footsteps where there are no men, voices calling from the creek. I tried to tell her it's the wind, but even I am not sure anymore. Emma turned another page, the words growing more frantic. Someone scratched symbols on the boarding house door. Not soldiers. Not locals. When I asked the preacher, he told me to burn them before the curse took root. I laughed then. I'm not laughing now. Daniel swallowed hard. Curses. This is getting ridiculous. Emma shot him a look. You saw that place. You heard what that old man said. Something happened there, and it wasn't just fire. They continued reading. The next entry sent a chill crawling up Emma's spine. Margaret begged me to leave. She said the whispers had started again, that the boarders were seeing shapes in the woods. I told her duty bound me here, to protect the others. But last night, I saw them too. Figures in the dark, standing among the trees, watching the house burn from the inside out. Emma's voice trembled. He saw it before it happened. At the bottom of the final page, a single line was written in darker ink, as though added later, if this finds you, Margaret, bury the key. Do not open what should remain closed. Daniel stepped back from the table, shaking his head. And yet here we are, doing exactly what he said not to. Emma closed the journal gently, staring at the key. Maybe Grandma knew. Maybe that's why she kept this hidden. To keep whatever happened from happening again. The storm outside intensified, lightning flashing across the sky, illuminating the kitchen in brief, ghostly bursts. The lights flickered, then steadied. For a heartbeat, Emma thought she saw movement by the hallway, a flicker of shadow, shaped like a person. She turned sharply, but there was nothing there. Did you see that? She asked. Daniel frowned. See what? She hesitated. Nothing, maybe it was just the lights. But deep down, she wasn't sure. The air felt charged, thick with something unseen. The smell of smoke lingered faintly, impossible to explain. They decided to photograph the items for records before putting them back. But when Emma reached for the letter again, a small folded scrap fell out from between the pages. It was newer than the rest, written in her grandmother's handwriting. It read, "If you ever find Hollow Creek, don't go near the oak. That's where it sleeps." Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. Sleeps. What does she mean? Emma stared at the note, the rain pounding harder outside, as if trying to drown out the silence that followed. I think, she said slowly, she wasn't talking about a person. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The air in the room felt colder, the shadows stretching longer than they should have. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, deep, echoing, almost like the sound of something stirring beneath the ground. Emma folded the note and placed it back inside the trunk. She shut the lid, but the sense of unease didn't fade. The lock clicked again, sharper this time, almost as though the trunk itself had exhaled. They both stood there, listening. The rain outside began to slow, tapering into a faint drizzle. But in the quiet that followed, Emma could swear she heard something else, soft, rhythmic, like footsteps echoing faintly from the hallway. She turned toward the sound, heart pounding. Daniel? But Daniel was already looking at her, eyes wide. That wasn't me. The next flash of lightning revealed nothing in the doorway. Only the faint smell of burnt wood lingering in the air. And yet, somewhere deep in the walls of the house, or perhaps beneath it, something old had begun to wake. The following morning was unnaturally quiet. The storm had passed, but the air outside still clung to a heavy mist that blanketed the trees and muted every sound. Emma sat at the kitchen table, staring at the trunk, which now seemed to dominate the room like a living presence. The key lay beside it, catching faint slivers of light. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard it, faint whispers, soft as breath, threading through her dreams. Daniel entered, looking just as restless. "I checked the doors 3 times, he muttered. "Thought I heard someone moving downstairs around midnight." Emma didn't look up. "I heard it too." Neither of them wanted to say the word that hovered unspoken between them, voices. The sound had been faint, distant, yet unmistakably human. A whisper just outside their perception, too clear to be the wind, too soft to belong to anyone in the house. Over breakfast, they tried to distract themselves with conversation, but every clink of a spoon or creak of the floorboards made them jump. Daniel finally broke the silence. "Maybe we need to find out what really happened at Hollow Creek. If Elias was there, and Grandma was connected somehow, there has to be a record." Emma nodded. "The library might have something. Newspaper archives, local reports, maybe even property records. If there was a fire, it should have been documented." By late morning, they were driving toward the old county library, a 2-story red brick building surrounded by overgrown hedges and oak trees heavy with moss. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Reeves, listened carefully as Emma explained what they were looking for. When Emma mentioned Hollow Creek, the woman's expression changed subtly, her polite smile fading. "That's not a name you hear often," she said softly. "You're sure you want to dig into that?" Emma hesitated, but Daniel pressed forward. "We just want to understand what happened there. It's part of our family history." Mrs. Reeves led them into the archives room, where dust-coated files filled endless rows of cabinets. She pointed toward a section marked 1860 to 1870, local events. "If it's there, it'll be under disasters or property damage." Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "Be careful what you stir up. Some stories don't like being remembered." They spent hours combing through brittle newspapers and handwritten ledgers. Most entries were mundane, trade reports, obituaries, weather logs. But near the bottom of one drawer, Emma found a faded clipping dated October 17, 1864. The headline read, "Tragedy at Hollow Creek, Boarding House Fire Claims 12 Lives." Her pulse quickened as she read aloud. The article described a mysterious fire that had consumed a boarding house late one night. Witnesses reported seeing strange lights in the woods hours before the blaze began. No survivors were found. The cause was never determined. What made her pause, though, was a line near the end. Authorities discovered unfamiliar markings burned into the surrounding trees, symbols not recognized by any local clergy or scholars. Daniel leaned over her shoulder. "Markings? Like what Elias described in his journal?" Emma nodded, eyes wide. "And this was the same date. The same house." She flipped the page. A second article, printed weeks later, revealed even more. Local rumors persist that the fire was not an accident but a cleansing. Townsfolk claimed the boarders had been practicing forbidden rituals, summoning forces they could not control. Daniel frowned. So they were accused of witchcraft. "Or something worse," Emma whispered. "Maybe they weren't trying to summon anything, maybe they were trying to contain it." Before they could discuss further, Mrs. Reeves appeared again. "Find what you needed?" she asked, her tone cautious. Emma hesitated, then showed her the article. The librarian's expression darkened. "That house, it's gone now. They tore down what was left decades ago. But the land, nobody ever built on it again. People say it's cursed. Animals won't go near the creek. And those who've camped there overnight, they hear things. Voices calling their names." Daniel tried to laugh it off, but it came out hollow. "Probably just local legends." Mrs. Reeves didn't smile. Maybe. But legends start somewhere. Back in the car, Emma couldn't stop thinking about the phrase from the last letter, "If they ever discover what we did at Hollow Creek, it will destroy us both." Her grandmother had been just a girl when the fire happened, yet somehow, she was connected to it. Elias's journal and the letters proved that much. But how? As they drove, the road grew narrower, lined with gnarled trees whose branches reached overhead like skeletal hands. The fog thickened. The GPS glitched and went black. "This can't be right," Daniel muttered, tapping the screen. "We're not even near the old town yet." Emma stared out the window. The world outside seemed suspended in time, motionless, soundless, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Then, faintly through the mist, she saw it, a wooden sign, half buried in the dirt. The paint was almost gone, but the name was still visible beneath the moss. Hollow Creek Road. Her blood ran cold. "Daniel, stop the car." They sat there for a moment, the engine idling, rain beginning to fall again in light, steady drops. Daniel swallowed. "You don't actually want to go down there, do you?" Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. "We have to. Whatever happened to Grandma started here. If we don't face it, it'll never end." The wind picked up, rustling through the trees like distant murmurs. Somewhere, far beyond the curve of the road, a faint voice seemed to call Emma's name, soft, almost tender, but impossibly far away. She turned toward the sound instinctively, though her heart was hammering in her chest. When she looked back, the trunk key on the dashboard had started to tremble. Not from the car's vibration, not from her hand, just a subtle, rhythmic movement, as though something unseen was pulling it gently toward the direction of Hollow Creek. And in that moment, Emma understood something she could not explain. The voices weren't just echoes from the past. They were calling her home. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as Daniel guided the car slowly down the narrow road, branches scraping against the sides like skeletal fingers. The further they drove, the thicker the fog became, rolling across the ground in ghostly tendrils, swallowing the landscape whole. The GPS remained blank, and their phones had lost signal miles ago. It was as if the world outside had simply decided to stop existing beyond this place. Emma sat in the passenger seat, the letters clutched tightly in her lap. The air inside the car was cold, colder than it should have been, and no amount of heat from the vents seemed to change that. Every so often, she glanced at the trunk key on the dashboard. It was still trembling, faintly, in sync with some invisible pulse. Daniel tried to make light of it. "Maybe it's just the vibration of the road." But Emma shook her head. "The engine's barely running. It's something else." They rounded a bend and came upon a rusted metal gate half consumed by weeds. A weathered sign hung from one hinge, its lettering almost erased by time. Only 2 words were still legible: Hollow Creek. Daniel parked the car, cutting the engine. The sudden silence was suffocating. No wind. No birds. Not even the distant hum of insects. Just a stillness that pressed down on them like the weight of buried history. They stepped out cautiously, their shoes crunching on gravel. Beyond the gate, the road stretched into the fog, bordered by skeletal trees and broken fence posts. Emma felt an odd pull in her chest, a strange familiarity, as though she'd walked this path before in another lifetime. She unfolded one of the letters and began reading aloud, her voice barely a whisper against the heavy air. "If you ever find Hollow Creek again, remember the oak. That's where the truth sleeps." Daniel frowned. That's what Grandma's note said, too. About something sleeping beneath the oak. They followed the overgrown path deeper into the woods. The ground was soft, damp from the night's rain. Here and there, fragments of stone foundations jutted from the earth, remnants of what might have once been walls or chimneys. The ruins of the boarding house, Emma thought. As they moved further in, the fog thinned slightly, revealing a clearing surrounded by blackened stumps. In the center stood a massive oak tree, gnarled and ancient, its branches twisting toward the sky like frozen flames. The bark was dark and scarred, and the earth around it seemed unnaturally sunken, as if something beneath the soil had shifted long ago. "This must be it," Daniel said quietly. Emma stepped closer. The air around the tree was colder, denser. When she touched the bark, a pulse of warmth traveled up her arm, like the faint echo of a heartbeat. She pulled her hand back instantly, staring at it in disbelief. "There's something here," she whispered. "Something alive." Daniel crouched beside the roots, brushing away leaves and dirt. "Wait, there's something buried." His fingers hit metal. He dug faster until a small, rusted box emerged from the soil. It was about the size of a shoebox, sealed shut with wax that had long since cracked. The symbol on its lid was unmistakable, the same oak leaf engraving that appeared on the trunk. Emma's stomach tightened. "It's the same mark. This belonged to them." They exchanged a look, unspoken fear passing between them. Still, Daniel pried at the box until the lid gave way with a reluctant groan. Inside were more letters, their paper brittle with age, and a small glass vial containing what looked like ashes. But it wasn't the contents that made Emma's breath catch, it was the faint, lingering smell that rose from inside. Smoke and lavender. The same scent that had haunted the trunk. She picked up one of the letters, the ink still legible despite its age. "To whoever finds this, know that what sleeps beneath Hollow Creek was never meant to wake. We tried to bind it with fire, but fire only feeds it. It listens. It waits. It remembers every name that calls to it." Daniel exhaled sharply. "This can't be real. It's just superstition, old folklore." But Emma shook her head. "If it was folklore, Grandma wouldn't have hidden all this. Elias wouldn't have written that he saw figures in the woods before the fire. They were trying to stop something." Before Daniel could respond, the ground beneath them gave a low, groaning sound. The earth trembled faintly, enough to make the leaves shiver. From somewhere deep below, a sound rose, soft, rhythmic, like a whisper carried through stone. Emma's heart hammered. "Did you hear that?" Daniel's face had gone pale. "Yeah. And I don't think it's the wind." The sound faded as quickly as it came, leaving only the rustle of branches. Still, the air felt charged, alive with unseen movement. Emma knelt beside the roots, brushing her fingers across the soil. Something about the pattern of the roots caught her attention, they weren't spreading naturally. They twisted in a spiral, like something had forced them to grow in that shape. In the center of the spiral, barely visible beneath the dirt, was a circular burn mark. The same kind that had been under the trunk in Grandma's attic. She froze. "Daniel, this mark, it's the same one. The same symbol." He stared down at it, his voice barely a whisper. "Then whatever started there, it started here first." The realization hit them both at once. The trunk, the fire, the curse, it was all connected. The boarding house hadn't burned because of an accident. It had been a ritual. A desperate attempt to seal something inside. Emma looked up at the oak, its dark limbs creaking faintly in the wind that had just begun to stir. For the first time in hours, the world didn't feel silent anymore. The woods were whispering, low, overlapping voices that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Daniel grabbed her arm. "We need to go. Now." But Emma couldn't move. The whispers were calling her name again, softly, almost lovingly, like a memory she couldn't let go of. And deep within the hollow of the oak, she saw it, a faint red glow pulsing beneath the bark, like an ember waiting to reignite. She blinked, and it was gone. Daniel was already dragging her back toward the car. The whispers followed them through the trees, rising and falling like waves. By the time they reached the gate, the mist had thickened again, swallowing the path behind them. Neither of them spoke during the drive back. The key on the dashboard had stopped trembling. But when Emma glanced at it in the reflection of the window, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Etched faintly into the metal, barely visible in the dim light, was a single word that hadn't been there before. That night, the storm returned with a vengeance. Rain hammered the roof like a relentless drumbeat, and the wind howled through the trees, rattling the windows of the house. The lights flickered once, twice, before steadying again. Emma sat alone in the living room, staring at the trunk that still rested on the table. The photograph of Elias and Margaret lay beside it, their faces frozen in sepia tones, faces that now seemed to watch her, to wait. Daniel was upstairs, trying to sleep, though neither of them truly believed rest would come. Since returning from Hollow Creek, the air in the house had changed. The temperature dropped unpredictably. Shadows seemed thicker, lingering in corners long after lights were turned off. And then there were the sounds, soft footsteps pacing in the hallway when no one was there, the faint rustle of pages turning somewhere in the dark. Emma tried to dismiss it as imagination, exhaustion, but the key on the table kept moving, just slightly, enough to make her stomach twist with dread. Every few minutes, it shifted, rotating a few degrees toward the attic door. As though it wanted her to go back up. She picked it up, running her thumb across the engraved word, remember. The moment she touched it, a pulse shot through her hand, a flash of light behind her eyes, blinding, soundless. And then, for just a second, she saw something that wasn't there, flames consuming wooden walls, screams echoing, a figure standing by the oak tree, holding the same key she now held, whispering words she couldn't understand. When her vision cleared, she was trembling. The key had grown warm. Daniel's voice startled her. "You okay?" She turned to see him standing at the bottom of the stairs, his expression pale, uneasy. "I saw something," she whispered. "The fire. Hollow Creek burning. Elias was there. I could feel it." Daniel rubbed his face, looking drained. We're getting obsessed. These letters, that place, it's getting into our heads." "No," she said firmly. "It's not just in our heads. Grandma was protecting us from this. She knew. She kept the trunk sealed for a reason, and now she hesitated, her voice faltering. "We've opened it again." A sudden sound interrupted her, a faint, deliberate knock from upstairs. 3 slow, even taps. Daniel froze. "Please tell me that's the pipes." Emma shook her head. "The pipes don't knock in patterns." The sound came again. Knock, knock, knock. Each one heavier, closer. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and started up the stairs despite her protest. "If it's an animal or a loose board, I'm ending this right now." Emma followed, her heart pounding. The house seemed to groan around them, the old wood creaking under invisible weight. When they reached the landing, the light flickered across the hallway, and for an instant, Emma saw a shape at the far end. A human outline, standing perfectly still, facing the attic door. "Daniel," she whispered. "Someone's up there." He swung the beam of the flashlight forward, but the figure was gone. The attic door stood ajar, swaying gently as if someone had just passed through. They climbed the last steps together. The moment Daniel touched the attic door, the light flickered again, and then went out completely. The darkness was absolute. Emma's breath came fast, her pulse thundering in her ears. She reached out blindly, fingers brushing against the doorframe, the air thick with the scent of smoke. When the flashlight flicked back on, the beam cut through the gloom and illuminated the trunk. It was open. The letters were scattered across the floor, pages fluttering as though moved by a wind that shouldn't exist. And beneath them, a faint red glow seeped through the cracks in the attic floorboards, the same glow she had seen beneath the oak. "Daniel," she whispered. "It followed us." Before he could respond, a voice rose from below the floor, soft, melodic, almost human. A whisper that stretched and broke into something else. "You brought it back." Emma stumbled backward, the beam of light trembling in her hand. The red glow pulsed brighter, outlining the edges of a shape beneath the floorboards, a coiled, twisting darkness that seemed to breathe. The letters nearest the light began to burn at their edges, the ink melting into black trails. The flames didn't spread outward, but inward, as though being consumed by the paper itself. Daniel dropped to his knees, trying to grab the journal. "We have to stop it. We have to close it." "How?" Emma cried. He looked up, eyes wide. "Fire. That's what they did. That's how they tried to contain it." Emma hesitated only for a second before nodding. She ran for the matches kept near the storage box. When she returned, the red glow had intensified, shadows on the walls were moving, bending into shapes that looked almost human, their mouths whispering in the dark. Daniel struck a match, but the flame sputtered violently, almost extinguished by an unseen breath. He shielded it, lighting a strip of torn newspaper, and threw it toward the glowing cracks. The fire caught instantly, spreading in a circle of orange light that illuminated the attic in bursts. For a brief, terrifying moment, the whispers turned into screams. The red glow flared one last time, and then went out. Silence. The smoke thickened, stinging their eyes, forcing them to stumble down the stairs. When they reached the bottom, both were coughing, their faces streaked with soot. Daniel looked back toward the attic, where faint wisps of gray smoke drifted through the ceiling. "Did it work?" Emma asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know," he said. "But something's changed. I can feel it." She nodded slowly, clutching the key in her hand. It was cool again, no longer trembling. For a brief second, she thought the nightmare was over. But as they turned toward the door, the faint smell of smoke lingered, not from the attic, but from the ground beneath them. And when Emma looked down, she saw the same blackened circular burn forming slowly on the living room floor, spreading outward like a dark flower blooming in silence. Something hadn't been sealed. It had been transferred. The thing beneath the oak was no longer buried. It was here, and it was waiting. The morning after the fire, the house stood eerily quiet, wrapped in a suffocating stillness that felt unnatural. Emma and Daniel hadn't slept. They had spent the night sitting on the couch, watching the faint burn mark spread wider across the living room floor. It had stopped just before reaching the trunk, as though obeying some invisible boundary. Every time Emma looked at it, her stomach twisted, the pattern looked almost deliberate, almost designed. The shape wasn't random, it resembled a circle surrounded by uneven lines, forming a sigil that neither of them recognized. Daniel tried to rationalize it. "Maybe it's just from the fire upstairs," he said, though his voice carried no conviction. He had dark circles under his eyes, his hands trembling slightly as he held his coffee mug. "Wood burns weird sometimes." Emma shook her head. The fire was contained in the attic. This came from below. She crouched beside the mark, tracing the edge of the soot with her finger. The air near it was warm, too warm, and she could still hear something faint, like a heartbeat beneath the floorboards. She backed away quickly, the realization settling heavy in her chest. "It's not gone. We didn't destroy it. We just woke it up." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Then we finish what Elias couldn't. We find where it started." They spent the next few hours gathering everything they could about Hollow Creek, the letters, the photos, even Margaret's old diary. Piece by piece, they assembled a timeline. The fire that destroyed the village hadn't been an accident, it was a ritual gone wrong. Elias had written about the hollow beneath the oak, describing it as a gateway between what he called the living soil and the sleeping dark. He had tried to seal it with fire, but something, or someone, had interfered. One passage in the diary caught Emma's eye. Margaret's handwriting trembled across the page. "If the flame dies before the final word is spoken, the hollow will find another route. It cannot be destroyed, only moved." Daniel looked up from the page. "Moved," he repeated. "Like, from Hollow Creek to here? Emma nodded slowly, realization dawning. The oak. Grandma planted one right after they left the village. It's the same tree. It's always been connected. The color drained from Daniel's face. So when the roots grew, it carried the hollow with it. They both turned toward the window. Through the gray morning fog, they could see the old oak standing at the edge of the property, its branches twisted like skeletal fingers. The ground beneath it was dark, as if scorched long ago. We have to go back out there, Emma said quietly. Daniel hesitated. After last night? If we don't, this won't stop, she replied. You saw it too. It's spreading. By afternoon, the sky had turned the color of ash. They packed what they thought they'd need: salt, matches, the key, and the diary. The wind picked up as they stepped outside, carrying with it a faint sound that made Emma's blood run cold. It was whispering again, soft, layered voices calling from nowhere and everywhere at once. They reached the oak as the first drops of rain began to fall. The earth around its base was soft, damp, and oddly warm to the touch. Daniel used a shovel to dig, each thrust of metal into soil sounding heavier than it should. After a few minutes, the ground began to pulse faintly, glowing from beneath just like the attic floor. Stop, Emma said. We're close. Daniel wiped his brow, his breathing ragged. What now? She held up the key. Margaret's note said the seal must be locked with fire and faith. We can't just burn it again. We have to close it the way she meant to. She knelt, pressing the key into the earth. The glow flared instantly, spreading outward in a ring of crimson light. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, desperate. The soil trembled as if something underneath was struggling to break through. Emma! Daniel shouted as the ground cracked open. A gust of hot air burst upward, carrying the stench of smoke and decay. The light poured out, blinding. For a moment, she saw shapes within it, faces twisted in silent screams, hands reaching upward. She clutched the diary, shouting the words scrawled across the final page: let the hollow sleep beneath the root of fire, bound by blood and bound by memory. The earth roared in response. The oak shuddered violently, its branches thrashing as if alive. Daniel grabbed her hand, pulling her back as the red light surged to a peak and then collapsed inward, vanishing in a rush of cold air. Silence fell. The ground sealed itself, the glow fading until only the scorched soil remained. The oak stood still again, motionless in the rain. They stood there for several long minutes, trembling, soaked, and silent. Finally, Daniel whispered, "Is it over?" Emma stared at the tree, then down at the key lying half buried in the dirt. The engraving had changed. Where it once read "Remember," it now said "Forgive." She picked it up, feeling its weight, its strange calm. "I don't know," she said softly. "But maybe that's what it wanted all along." As they turned back toward the house, a soft wind rustled the branches above. It almost sounded like a sigh, a breath of relief, or a warning too faint to understand. And far beneath the roots of the oak, something ancient stirred once more, not in rage this time, but in quiet, patient waiting. For days after the ritual, the house remained unervingly still. The smell of smoke had faded, replaced by the faint scent of rain-soaked wood. Emma wandered through each room with quiet hesitation, half expecting to hear the whispers again or see the faint red glow under the floorboards. But nothing came. The silence, though comforting at first, soon began to feel heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. Daniel tried to convince himself that it was over. He fixed the attic stairs, repainted the scorched spots on the wall, even repaired the burnt section of the rug. Yet every nail he hammered seemed to echo louder than it should, as if the house didn't want to forget. Emma spent most of her time sorting through the remaining letters, now brittle and yellow from age. There were only a few left untouched by fire, each one written in Elias's familiar, slanted hand. She hesitated before opening the first. The ink had faded, but his words were still legible: "To those who come after me, forgive us." The hollow does not hunger for the living, it hungers for remembrance. To bury the truth is to feed it. Her fingers trembled as she read the final lines. "If you find this, return it to where it began. Let the forgotten be remembered, and the hollow will sleep." Emma looked up from the letter, her gaze drifting toward the distant horizon where Hollow Creek once stood. The idea lodged itself in her mind like an echo. "We have to take them back," she said quietly. Daniel frowned. "Back? You mean to the ruins?" She nodded. "They don't belong here. None of this ever did. The hollow wasn't trying to destroy, it was trying to be remembered." At first, Daniel resisted. The thought of going back to that burned, haunted valley filled him with unease. But when he saw the resolve in Emma's eyes, he understood there was no stopping her. So one gray morning, they packed the remaining letters, the diary, and the key, and set off toward Hollow Creek. The drive was long and silent. The winding road cut through the remnants of forest that had once surrounded the village. The trees stood black and bare, their charred trunks like grave markers in a forgotten cemetery. As they descended into the valley, the air grew heavier, denser, as though it hadn't been disturbed in decades. When they reached the old church ruins, Emma felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest. The bell tower had long since collapsed, and the graveyard behind it was overgrown with wild vines and moss. Still, she could sense it, the same energy, the same quiet pull she had felt beneath the oak. They stepped carefully through the debris until they reached the altar, half buried under fallen beams and dust. Emma knelt, brushing away the dirt. Beneath it lay a hollow space, a perfect cavity in the earth lined with smooth stones. Her breath caught. "It's still here." Daniel crouched beside her, holding the box of letters. "Are you sure about this?" She nodded. "It's what he wanted. It's what they all wanted." Together, they placed the letters inside the hollow, one by one, gently, as though laying something sacred to rest. The final letter, sealed with a broken wax crest, was the one Elias had written for his son. Emma hesitated before setting it down, her throat tightening. "He didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. "He was just trying to protect them." As the last letter touched the stone, the air shifted. The faintest gust of wind moved through the ruins, carrying with it a whisper, not of anger this time, but something softer, like a sigh of release. Dust lifted into the air, swirling in gentle circles before settling again. The key in Emma's hand began to warm. She looked down to see the engraving glowing faintly. The word "forgive" shimmered once before fading completely, leaving the surface smooth and unmarked. She smiled through tears, understanding at last. The key had never been meant to lock something away, it had been meant to open the path for peace. Daniel exhaled, tension draining from his body. "It's done," he said quietly. Emma rose to her feet, looking around at the ruins. The sunlight broke through the clouds then, soft and golden, illuminating the valley that had been shrouded in darkness for generations. For the first time since the trunk had been opened, she felt something like calm, deep, unshakable calm. As they turned to leave, she looked back one final time. The ruins seemed almost alive in the sunlight, their shadows gentler now, their silence no longer oppressive. Somewhere beneath the soil, the letters lay undisturbed, their words finally home. That night, back at the farmhouse, Emma dreamed of Hollow Creek, not the charred ruins she had seen, but the village as it once was. Children running through tall grass, the church bell ringing in the distance, and Elias standing beneath the oak, smiling softly. In his hand, he held the key, shining like gold. He turned toward her and whispered, "Thank you." She woke with tears in her eyes and sunlight streaming through the window. The air felt lighter, freer. The hollow had found its rest, and so, finally, had they. Outside, the old oak swayed gently in the morning breeze. Its branches stretched wide, its roots deep and steady. And beneath the earth, where once there had been whispers, there was now only silence, the peaceful kind that follows when a story has finally been told.